going to say hello. Welcome to everybody who has joined us. It is so wonderful to welcome you with us. I'm going to share my screen once again, now that I know what is actually happening. My name's Becca Legg, and I have the very great privilege, actually, of leading an organisation called Restored that works to speak up about violence against women and girls and to equip the church to stand against domestic abuse and to support survivors in particular. And it is wonderful to be part of this afternoon or this morning, depending on where you are in the world, or even this evening, I suppose, depending on where you're clicking in from. Now, Restored hosts an organisation called CNEDA, and and that is a coalition of different organisations from all around the world who work to stand against domestic abuse in all of its forms. And it's all organisations from a Christian faith background. But we're here this afternoon or this morning or this evening. I'm based in the UK, so I'm going to keep saying this afternoon, so bear with me, to consider this question: are men allies in the fight against domestic violence? And we're going to use the words domestic abuse and domestic violence probably interchangeably, partly due to different cultures, different backgrounds, different languages that use that in different ways. But we are talking about the same thing when we speak about that. And we're really intrigued to look at this idea of men as allies, partly because as we look back at the Beijing platform for action, we see that in Article 25, there is this desire to encourage men to participate fully in all actions towards equality. And so as we consider domestic abuse as a gendered issue, where are men in that story? How can men play a part, and what are they doing to change that story? So without any further ado, I shall continue just to introduce a little bit about CNEDA, this Christian network to end domestic abuse. You can find out a little bit more about that online by using the QR code that should have just popped up in front of you, or by going to the Restored website, which has a lot more information on it. And essentially, we have over 45 members. Some are individuals, some are organisations, but every organisation or individual working in some shape or form to support survivors of domestic abuse, to eradicate the world of it, or working in a context in which domestic abuse is part of the broader problem that they are responding to. Membership is a friendship thing on many, many levels. And it looks like this. It looks like regular video calls. So not every week, but every quarter we connect together. And it's a time to encourage one another, to pray together, to share knowledge, to share resources, to hear what one another is doing, and to make sure that we bring our voices together to elevate that voice and to speak up in a louder context. And this webinar is just a small part of that. But we have got some wonderful resources. The first of which was as a joint project between many of the different organisations, a book that was put together to be translated into multiple languages to help the church to address what does it look like to have biblical relationships and to end domestic abuse. So that's available on the website alongside a whole host of other resources that Restored has produced as well. And we also push a campaign every year, this Red Chair project that began with Valerie, who will speak to us a little bit later on in France, as une place pour elle, a place for them, a place for the women who have lost their lives to gender-based violence across the world. And it's an opportunity during the 16 days of activism, or any time of the year, frankly, to be able to speak up, to be able to take the red chair to a place in the public and remind people of what happens in the world around them that so often we overlook. So we see that happening around the world. There's some little just examples there of some of the different countries in which that's happened. But we're really excited to see that gathering momentum every single year, and more places hosting a red chair, speaking up for those women who have lost their lives. So if you'd like to know a little bit more about CNEDA, who are together with the World Baptist Alliance Women are hosting today's session, then you can go and look at that now. But I first and foremost want to focus on the topic at hand. Are men allies in the fight against domestic violence? Well, the very simple answer to that is yes. Yes, they are. Yes, they should be. But I want to take a step back, first of all, to look at why it's necessary, why it's important, and actually then to go forward and look at what it can look like to be a male ally. And as the session goes through, we're going to be hearing from some wonderful men who have been incredible allies to women in their work to end gender-based violence in general and domestic abuse in particular. We're going to see some videos of the work that they're doing. We're going to hear about a case in particular from France, which has raised the issue of how we need to change male culture and how men need to be involved in that. And then we're going to have a chance for some questions and answers towards the end. So if, as you listen throughout the next hour, you have anything that you want to ask as a question, please do use the Q&A facility at the bottom of your Zoom screen, or place it into the chat on Hoover, and we will collate those questions and we will feed them over to those in our Q&A panel a little bit later on. But I do want to address this question. I do want to think about men as allies, ending domestic abuse. And I want to start by perhaps going slightly sideways. Because you see, if we want to end domestic abuse, we do have to understand why it happens in the first place. And working within a faith context, understanding the importance that faith has in the discussion around domestic abuse and as a response to domestic abuse, then we need to think about that on a theological perspective as well. Fundamentally, domestic abuse is about power. And I'm just going to put up a bit of a shared definition for power as I speak. So I'm just going to consider power as the capacity or ability to direct or influence the behaviour of others or the course of events. And I'm going to talk about a faith perspective and some theology, but tying it in with what we as humankind have looked at, researched, come to understand around the situation as well. In 2002, a man called Lundy Bancroft, who had spent 15 years working with perpetrators of domestic abuse, over 2,000 abusive men, wrote a book called Why Does He Do That? What sits at the cause? And he fundamentally said that abuse is always about power and creating a power imbalance or inequality to control or exploit another person. All abuse looks like that. That's where it sits and where it understands. And he explains it a little like this. He says, if you think about those behaviours that show up within domestic abuse, whether that is physical violence, whether it's forced sex, whether it's shouting, emotional abuse, gaslighting, isolating somebody, or economically restricting them, all of those things, he says, you can imagine a little like fruits on a tree. And you could remove those fruits. You could stop those fruits from happening again. You could, stop somebody from doing one of those fruits, but those fruits will always grow back, because they grow on a tree. This is how he describes it, a tree whose branches are controlled. And so these fruits really are the behaviours that enable that control. And that control grows out of a stem or a trunk of entitlement, where the abuser believes they're entitled to get what they want from who they want. And all of that grows out of a knowledge or a belief system that says, I own my partner, I own my wife, she is mine. Therefore, I'm entitled to make her do what I want, and I can control her using these fruits. And that's Lundy Bancroft's explanation of why domestic abuse happens. But as a Christian, as a person of faith, as I looked at this, I thought, do you know what? Lundy Bancroft was not the first person to talk about trees and fruits. And we see that really clearly in the Bible. And it's helpful, I think, to have a theological understanding of the same thing. Jesus talked to his disciples and said that they would be known by the fruits that they bear and by their behaviours. And similarly, Paul in the letters talks about the fruits of being filled with the Holy Spirit, the fruits of faith in Jesus, if you like, love, joy, peace. That's what it looks like when your roots don't go down into a sense of ownership of somebody else, but into a sense of community, into a sense of love, into a sense of who God created us to be. And so we can see that actually this picture of a tree is quite a helpful picture. And then if we were to go right back to the beginning of time, right back to the beginning of scripture, we find another tree with another fruit. And I'm taking the metaphor a little bit far, perhaps, but actually we see in the creation narratives a God who creates men and women equal in his image, and I'll come to that in just a moment. But we see it begin to go wrong when it comes to the fall. And the fall is depicted around a fruit on a tree of the knowledge of good and evil. And most people of faith would tell you that the temptation was never about the fruit of the tree itself, not a big fat juicy apple, even though that's often how it's depicted. But actually it's about the wisdom that went with that fruit. And it's not even about the wisdom. It's about what would happen if you had that wisdom. And to understand that, you have to really begin to look at the story. It's a desire for power. And the serpent in the story tells the woman, if you have this, you will be like God. You will be like God. You will be strong like God. You will have more power like God. And that comes back to this concept that as humans, we're made in the image of God. And the Bible tells us in the creation narratives that men and women were made in God's image. And that means lots of things. Some people talk about what that means is we're made to love one another like God was created, is a community of love in the Holy Trinity. Some people would talk about creativity. God was creative right back there in those creation narratives. And that means that we're born and created to be creative too, whether that's music, art, spoken word, poetry, whatever it looks like. But fundamentally, what it also means is that we're powerful. And the Bible never uses the word omnipotent, but theologians do. They gather it from all different scriptures. God is all powerful, and made in his image, humankind is potent, it's powerful, but it has this desire to be all powerful. And that's what sits at the root of so much of what has gone wrong in the world around us. We see that desire for power over in humans, left, right, and centre, whether it's in the school playground, whether it's in the business, in the office at work, whether it's in international politics. And I don't want to delve into that too much today, but we're seeing it playing out on such a great world stage at the moment. The desire to be the most powerful, the one who can make others bend to our will. And we see it in relationships, and we see it in the relationships between men and women. And that desire for power has been turned into that desire to create inequality so that I can be more powerful than you. We see systems of power that humans have created over the ages to have power over one another. And we see that in racism, and we see it in classism, and we see it in ableism and ageism, and we see it in misogyny. And in fact, I think that what those creation narratives show us is that that first system of power over was the power was misogyny, was, what part of the curse that Eve heard from God in that first moments after she took the fruit was she was told that your desire will be for your husband and he will rule over you. And that has been the first system of power that was created as men began to rule over women and began to, not in a God-ordained way, just in a God-recognized way. This is what's going to happen now that power has seeped into your world. And we see misogyny worked out in so many different ways. And I won't just read from a screen, but one of those is domestic abuse. We see that, and domestic abuse can be seen going in different directions. And we know that sometimes men can be the victims and sometimes women can be the perpetrators. But always it is because of a sense of inequality, whatever that looks like. But the one that we see the most often by such a long way is men holding power over women because they're men, because they think that they're better, because they believe that women are less, that they should rule over them. But we also know that whilst this system of power means that men can step into that and can use that to hold power over women, it can be any man, but it is not all men. And it is absolutely critical that the men that it isn't step up and speak up and try to change things. And I'm really privileged to know so many wonderful men who do exactly that, because the need for male allies is extraordinary. And as we look at what that means, that can look like challenging those traditional perspectives around masculinity. And we see so many toxic messages around what masculinity can look like, that if we can just challenge those, it will change things slowly but surely and shift culture and shift what's feeding that tree. And we are going to hear from some wonderful men who are doing just that in just a moment. It matters within the church that we preach a different story. Patriarchy has seeped into the church and has been reinforced by misuse of scriptures. So it matters within the church that we have pastors and ministers and vicars and leaders who tell a different story, who show what the Bible actually says, who go back to those creation narratives which speak of equality, made in God's image together as men and women, and who are prepared to preach that. It matters that men get involved in raising awareness of domestic abuse and they join the work to end it. And again, we're going to hear from somebody who is doing just that. And it is wonderful when we see men stepping up and saying we want to support survivors of gender-based violence, that we want to be part of putting the world back to its rights. And we need men to do this because in a system and in a world where actually this inequality exists, it needs men to speak to men. This isn't just a women's issue. This is an issue that will only ever get fixed, only ever get changed when we see male culture changing, and we need men to speak into that culture. And so with that in mind, I would love to introduce some of the men that we have working to do that and who we've got joining us today. And we've got a number of videos that I'm going to just whistle through now that will just begin to demonstrate that. And the first of those videos is a video that has been put together by an organisation called Press Red that's based in UK. It's a fantastic organisation that wants to press red to say stop, to end gender-based violence. And it's a beautiful piece of spoken word or poetry by a man called Britton, who has put together the content and delivered it. But I think it explains the situation beautifully, and it highlights this need to challenge men to think differently about what masculinity is.
It starts with pink or blue. Princess or dinosaurs, none of this is new. Toy dolls for her, toy guns for him. She must be passive, he must just win. It starts with hairs growing on his chin, shaven on her legs. She's fighting to be heard, he's fighting to be seen. Bust a gut, vent a spleen, the man machine. With all its unwritten rules and regulations. Stand to attention. Be strong. Don't be gay. Get the girl, but don't be a girl. Take the lead. Bleed and terrify. Occupy. Don't cry. Don't cry. It starts with tears sucked up in the socket of his eye and stored up like anger in his bones. And where it goes, nobody knows. It starts with him clowning around in school. Be macho, stay cool, play the fool. Distance yourself from the experience of girls. This is a man's world. Stand tall, stand straight, radiate confidence. To hell with the consequence. Man up, back it up, pack it in, let's begin. Grab her, kick him. Flirt with the skirt, eyes unbuttoning her shirt. Nudge, nudge, boast, boast, another notch on the bedpost. But he's a bloke with the horn. Jack the lad sowing his wild oats while she's the butt of sexist jokes. She's sleazy, easy, a dirty little whore, and what is more, she should have kept herself pure, whilst he types dirty sluts in a search engine for porn. It starts with unequal opportunities for unequal pay. She's working night and day, twice as hard for half the pay, but it's jobs for the boys. So don't cause a scene, don't make a noise. Otherwise, you'll come across as bossy, but not the boss. But everybody knows women must be submissive, not assertive. Passive, not authoritative. It starts with a beep of the horn, a whistle from the work site, a pat on the back side. The side-eyed glance, little something stirred in her drink. Well, she didn't say no, but she didn't say yes either. It starts with victim blaming, saying it was all her fault, like she invited sexual assault by the way she dressed or drank or sank to her knees to pacify, not to please. It starts with belittling, mirroring microaggressions, skewering perceptions. A sexist joke equals harmless banter. It was just a slap, what does it matter? Minimising legitimising what goes on behind closed doors stays behind closed doors. She provoked him. She was asking for it. The kick, the punch, the clumps of hair. She likes it fiery, rough, and her blood is not worth the bruises on his knuckles. And women like a bad boy. They go weak for all those muscles. It starts with a history of patriarchy, a misogynistic hierarchy where it's toy dolls for her, toy guns for him, blood on his knuckles, bites on her skin. It starts with a kiss. And it ends with an old fella walking his dog, finding a body that nobody missed. Men. Isn't it about time we said enough is enough? Justice is the muscle we should flex and thrust. How can it be that so much bad can happen in the company of so many good men, time and time again? Men, our silence is compliance. Our indifference is as good as violence. We must stand up and be counted and use our privilege to speak. And when the man machine shouts us down, trying to tell us we are weak, we must find a voice for our mothers, daughters, sisters, wives, lovers, friends, neighbours, colleagues. For our silence comes with a cost. Our masculinity tied up in knots. For we are killing ourselves too. Men, this fight is as much for women as it is for me and you. Men, it starts with pink or blue. And it ends right now with me and you.
It's so good to be reading the comments actually in the chat box, and really delighted that Matt Britton will be joining us later on. Matt, who's performing that piece to be part of our Q&A panel later on. Matt, I hope you're reading the chat box. You've got lots of lovely compliments, and we'll make sure that all the resources that we're sharing are available to you. I think Merritt's putting the links in the chat box as we go. But what a wonderful video to share, to raise awareness, to challenge misogyny in our cultures, in our communities, to share with them. I won't keep going on. We'll talk about that later on. I want to share another video with you now and move on to meet another of our guests, Dominic, who is a pastor from Kenya, and he's actually in New York today, which I am not, very sadly, but he's in New York today and he's able to join us and also on our Q&A panel. But Dominic does some awesome work in Kenya, working with survivors of gender-based violence and speaking up to change the story for them and in this culture. So I'll let him introduce himself a little bit more now.
My name is Reverend Dominic Misolo. I'm ordained priest in the Anglican Church of Kenya in the Diocese of Bondo. I'm also the founder of Institute for Faith and Gender Empowerment, a registered faith-based organization advocating for gender justice and equality.
Could you please tell us why you got involved in this work?
I was inspired by the history and background of my family. I was born and raised up in a polygamous family where my father had 3 wives. Growing up as a young boy, I used to see my father fighting my mom almost every night, but I did not like that. I keep on questioning in my heart, what's going on here? Because I could not tell why my father was wielding much power over my mom. Going to church, I used to see all male church leaders, not seeing any woman leader. Also coming to the community, I could see the chiefs, assistant chief, and community leaders were all men. I thought this is God's design. But going to seminary at St. Paul's University years later, I came across academic journal that was talking about faith and gender justice, where I came to realize that equality for men and women is vital. From those academic journal, I came to realize that it is possible for church community to fight against gender-based violence. Institute for Faith and Gender Empowerment work with church leaders and traditional actors on biblical gender equality. We train and empower church leaders on equality for men and women, talking about gender-based violence and root causes of sexual and gender-based violence. We also work with men on positive masculinity, where we train men on how they can end gender-based violence, engaging most particularly male leaders from church, from community, and from civil society to understand the root causes of gender-based violence.
Nyinga iluongo ni Martin Amolo. Alime kanisa mar St. Stephen Akok Paris, Bondo Diocese. Kuom mago duto Yesu Kristo en jawarna.
An Rosemary Odenyo, an Nyargem, Ruoth Yesu Kristo en jawarna. Atedo ne Martin Amolo, wan gi nyithindo 6. Waleme kanisa mar Anglican ACK St. Stephen Sogoya Church.
I got the training at the Bondo Diocese Cathedral. The training was based on gender equality. Before I went to the training, on the way we live together with my wife, I was not spreading the bed. Also was told by my father that a man was not supposed to go to kitchen. So I have that attitude that kitchen is only meant for women, not for a man. Before the training, we could not share. Actually, we did not share my properties, especially money. But after the training, I found that all my properties belongs to me and her.
Before Baba went through the training, we were not sharing the views. We were not sharing the duties. He used to overburden me. I take care of the cattle we have, everything I used to do. And after the trainings, the life changed. We do share the ideas. We do share the duties. Everything is perfect. We do dialogue when things goes wrong. We sit down, we dialogue. And our lifestyle we are leading today, we do some counselings to others. And the entire community now are enjoying the fruits of the trainings. I thank you for the trainings. It has changed our lives a lot. Thank you, and continue training other people.
My name is Samuel Otieno Sude. I'm a priest in the Anglican Diocese of Bondo. I work in the missions department. I'm the missions director. The KAMA training was a venture between the mission department of the Anglican Diocese of Bondo and the IFH. It was a very, very special endeavor to try and get to see and understand the men's understanding of gender issues. It was held in the Diocese of Bondo in 4 archdeaconries. That is the Archdeaconry of Ramba, Chianda, Bondo, and Usenge. Each archdeaconry had about 2 days of interaction with the facilitators, and it was a wonderful time, a time of learning and a time of sharing. Both the facilitators and the participants were equally challenged, and we realized that there are a lot of issues that need to be debunked, especially issues to do with culture. We are Christians, but there's so much baggage of culture that we still carry across. So these were issues that were of great importance and of great challenge, and I'm sure that as we move forward, there is a lot that such interactions and such meetings will bring to the fore on how we can help gender issues in this diocese.
I want to call upon all bishops, archbishops, and all leaders in the Anglican Communion to work upon gender justice and equality in order to bring equality and justice for everyone.
Dominic, thank you so much. The work you're doing in Kenya is so amazing. You're changing lives and you are changing communities because you have chosen to use your voice to speak up and to challenge traditional beliefs around masculinity. Our next video is one from Tear Fund, I think. So let's just come on and see about the work that they're doing to transform masculinities in all the continents around the world.
Sexual and gender-based violence, SGBV, is a global pandemic which can affect men, women, boys and girls. It is, however, primarily perpetrated by men against women and girls. SGBV happens in every country around the world in different forms, none of which are acceptable. 1 in 3 women around the world experience some form of sexual and gender-based violence in their lifetime. The primary cause of violence against women and girls is gender inequality, where women and girls are valued less than men and boys. Tear Fund has been working with survivors of violence for over 10 years. And in 2017, we worked with survivors to produce a research report called Are We Listening to Survivors? It helped us to understand their unique experiences and the best ways to support them. These women and girls felt frustrated by the responsibility to end sexual and gender-based violence being placed on them. They told us that men and boys must be part of the solution and take responsibility for their actions. They wanted faith leaders to become allies who will support from the pulpit and with visible action to shift stigmatization and enable them to heal within their faith community. Together with survivors, TFAND has developed the Transforming Masculinities approach. Transforming Masculinities is a community-level, participatory, inclusive, reflective process which engages men and boys alongside women and girls. Its goal is to end sexual and gender-based violence by shifting the harmful social and gender norms which uphold violence against women and girls. It aims to create new positive norms that encourage equality. Social norms are the unwritten rules of what people expect others to do in their communities, or what people think others are doing, whether or not they actually are. Transforming Masculinities work with faith communities as the primary agents of positive change. These communities can play a big part in addressing sexual and gender-based violence, but are often overlooked or sidelined. All of us may have played a role in perpetuating and observing violence. We all need to be transformed. And in faith communities, this starts with faith leaders, those with considerable influence who shape existing social norms. Faith leaders are fully trained in the approach and are supported through their own journey of transformation. In turn, they speak out in their communities, sharing positive messages in sermons and modeling positive ways of being a man or a woman which value men and women equally. These faith leaders also select one man and one woman in their community to become gender champions who are trained the same way. They then facilitate small participatory discussion groups in their communities called community dialogues. Community dialogues are transformative spaces where men and women can reflect on their communities, families, and most importantly, their own beliefs, attitudes, and behaviors. Each dialogue runs for 6 weeks, with one session for 2 hours each week. The first 5 weeks are single-sex, and the final week brings women and men together to envision their community free from violence and abuse. Community dialogue participants often want to share their stories of change, telling others about how their families are stronger, how violence is stopping, and how women and men are thriving together. These members are supported by the gender champions and faith leaders to share their stories and messages in the wider communities. They share testimonies at church, over meals, even at sports events. Through sharing, more people can choose to adopt behaviors and attitudes which support equality, leading to a community-level change in norms and behaviors. Some contexts have specific issues or forms of sexual and gender-based violence that need more in-depth discussion. When communities identify specific needs, the approach can be adapted to address the issue raised by the community. For example, in Mali and Chad, there are very high rates of female genital mutilation or cutting. To help end this, TFAND, its partners and survivors adapted the content to include a focus on this issue in their trainings, as well as in the community dialogues. In other contexts, family planning decision-making has been the focus, as well as women's economic empowerment and girls' education. TFAND recognizes that although everyone is affected by sexual and gender-based violence, it is women and girls who are affected the most. Overwhelmingly, it is men who are perpetrating violence against women and girls, and it is essential for men to be transformed in order to be a part of the solution. The Transforming Masculinities program has proven to reduce rates of violence and enable communities of women and men to flourish equally and together. There is a solution, and each one of us must be part of it. To find out more, please visit TFAND Learn by clicking the link in the description.
Which you can't do at this precise moment, but again, we'll send out links to the thing, because there are some really wonderful models being used out there already, and we don't need to reinvent wheels. Next, I'd like to introduce Ollie, who is based in the UK and works as a pastor, and he also works with domestic abuse perpetrators as part of his day job during the week. So I will let him introduce himself as it comes up, as the video comes up, and we will hear about him. Ollie, thank you so much for joining us, and we'll look forward to chatting with you and asking you questions in the panel a little bit later. But for now, can you just explain who you are and what you do?
Yes. My name's Ollie Lamping, and I am a DAPS, Domestic Abuse Perpetrator Service Coordinator. And what that means is that I work with perpetrators of domestic abuse within a model in Bracknell Forest Child Social Services. So we work in that. I support the perpetrators in trying to make some changes, and my colleagues work with the victims, and we try to keep children in a safer space. My other job is that I'm a pastor together with my wife, Annie. We lead a church in Reading called Bright Hope. And so kind of have those dual hats, and Really Restored has been very, very key in kind of bringing those two jobs together.
That's amazing. Thank you. People might want to ask you more about how it influences church later. But for now, I know that within what you do, you're working with perpetrators of domestic abuse who can be male or female.
Yes.
But I wonder if there's a difference in the way that men and women hold power. We know that power and control sits at the heart of domestic abuse. Where do you see the differences?
Yeah, so I mean, definitely males and females can be perpetrators of domestic abuse, and you do see similar dynamics in the presentation. But I think that the way that power is held is very, very different. I've often fought this battle where people say, well, they're as bad as one another, or you know, women are as bad, and I say, no, hold up, no. You know, it's if you look at the number of deaths that we have, you know, 2 to 3 women every week being killed in domestic abuse here in the UK, compared to 1 man a month, you know, killed in domestic abuse. At the end of the year, you have about 12 men who have been killed in that dynamic, and then you have about 120 to 150 women. So no, absolutely, they're not the same. Those who are likely to be hospitalized, you know, have a severe injury are likely to be women. Of my cases, around 95%, 96% are male perpetrators. So definitely the gender issue is a huge one, which I will absolutely fight for. And the way that the power is held is very, very different. If you look at what I call the power cards, there are various power cards in life that the perpetrators will use and abuse. They're all there, and we can't really deny that they're there, but the way that they're used and abused is very different. So the physical upper hand, well, men absolutely have a physical upper hand. They can punch 70% harder than a female. They have bigger lung capacity. They are bigger, stronger, more powerful. So they have a physical upper hand, which can really, really come into play, especially with the threat of it. So you don't really need violence. You can use the threat of it, which women can't tend to use. The emotional upper hand, whereas men have been taught that you just don't show positive emotion. You just don't show any weakness. So who's likely to show signs of fear or break down in tears? It's likely to be the female who's asking, can you please stop? And men will just insist and carry on. The financial power card, men and women do the same job, and yet men tend to be paid about 24% more than women. And you know, women stop their career, lose their career, focus on childcare and home care, even if they're doing the same amount of hours. It seems that women to do more housework and labours. So financially, men are in a much stronger position. Culturally, every culture that I've looked at, that I've worked with over the years, I've found that there's so much misogyny, and you can pinpoint any country of the world and you're going to see there's probably a patriarchal history there, and over the years it's just been built up. And right now there are men who are saying, well, women have too much power, that we should be pushing back because, you know, feminism has gone crazy, and yet women are not equal. We are unfortunately a very misogynistic society. And then religion, a power card that is very much used and abused, where texts are taken out of context and are taught and widespread used to support a position of male dominance. So power is very, very different between men and women. And when I've come across women who use violence and comparing that to men who use violence, women tend to use violence out of desperation. They tend to use violence out of they've been used, abused, hurt, unloved, downtrodden, powerless, and they lash out, or they feel afraid, and so they try to defend themselves against probably somebody who's a lot bigger and stronger. Um, or they will defend their children. They will put their lives on the line for their children. Whereas men tend to use violence and abuse for dominance, that they want to establish that they're in charge. Women more for autonomy, for freedom, and men more for dominance. That's what the studies and my experience has shown.
So interesting. And so, you know, so helpful to recognize the gendered lens around domestic abuse, whilst always accepting that anybody can be a victim and anybody can be a perpetrator. So when you're, so I know that when you're working with men, what is it that you want to achieve, and how do you go about trying to achieve that?
Well, we absolutely we engage on the basis of wanting to make places safer for children, and our focus is always child focused, and then supporting the victim, and it has to be that parallel work. You can't work with a perpetrator without supporting first, you know, making sure the children and the partner, that risk assessment has to be in place. But the goal of working with a man ideally is you want him to change. You want him to change, but whether he changes or not, you have to safeguard the children and the partner. That's your main focus. So what motivates me in the work is that we're looking at safeguarding children, and we are very, very successful at safeguarding children. It's not a perfect system, there doesn't exist, but we make sure that children are in safer spaces, and that we're very good at. Getting a perpetrator to change their ways. A victim, impossible for a victim to get a perpetrator to change. That is just never going to happen. And that won't happen because the perpetrator doesn't believe that the partner has the right to ask for change, or that their opinion counts for anything, because they believe that they're in the right at all times. So a partner is not in a place. You need some professional intervention. Now, the way that we do that is I offer a one-to-one program, a course, generally 16 weeks. It can be more, it can be a bit less, depending on the case. And what you're doing is you're challenging male toxic attitudes. You're trying to tackle deep-rooted, entrenched thoughts and feelings, attitudes, beliefs. It's based upon their belief system. They don't tend to believe that they're doing anything wrong. They tend to believe that they own their partner, that possessiveness, that you belong to me type of attitude, and they have a sense of male entitlement, that I have a right to behave how I want. They're the things that you're really trying to tackle, and we do that through raising awareness around domestic abuse, through talking what different types of abuse are. We talk about the cycle of abuse. We do a timeout plan, like what are strategies to apply to alternatives to the use of abuse. We'll talk about the impact on the family. That's really key right there. Impact on the children, impact on the partner, impact on their own lives. What are they doing? Why is domestic abuse so damaging? Why is it so destructive and sets up a blueprint for the future generation? Why do we really want to tackle that? They're the types of conversations that you're trying to have with men. But first off, you need to get them to a place where they recognize that something is wrong. And that's probably the hardest bit of the program, is getting them to actually take some responsibility of what they've done. So it is definitely always an ongoing work, and the fact that somebody engages well in a program does not mean that things are better at home. Probably the children and the partner and other professional views long term are the ones who are going to be able to be better indicators as to whether meaningful change has occurred or not.
Ollie, that's so brilliant. And can I just say thank you? Thank you for being an ally. Thank you for, as a man, choosing to step in and make a difference and be prepared to challenge other men as well. In the midst of it, what you do is brilliant. Thanks so much.
Thank you.
And another pastor from Spain this time, who is really passionate about speaking up about the realities of domestic abuse.
Hola, mi nombre es Marcos Zapata y soy pastor en la Iglesia Buenas Noticias en la ciudad de Lugo, en España. A lo largo de mi trayectoria he trabajado en temas de enfoque pastoral, social, educativo y legal relacionados con la violencia de género, que es una de mis mayores preocupaciones, pero sobre todo con las víctimas colaterales que son los menores, niños y niñas que sufren esta plaga. Como pastor quisiera recordarles un versículo de la Biblia en el libro de Proverbios 31, 8 y 9, que siempre me ha impactado. Dice así: abre tu boca por el mudo, en el juicio de todos los desvalidos. Abre tu boca, juzga con justicia y defiende la causa del pobre y del menesteroso. ¿Qué nos dice la Biblia? La Biblia nos llama a ser defensores de los oprimidos y a hablar por aquellos que no tienen voz. Y tristemente, la violencia contra las mujeres sigue siendo una de las injusticias más extendidas en nuestra sociedad. Este es un tema que nos toca y nos afecta a todos. No es un problema exclusivo de las mujeres ni una lucha que deban de llevar a cabo en solitario. Si queremos un mundo más justo y seguro, necesitamos que los hombres se involucren activamente. Y hoy quisiera responder a algunas preguntas fundamentales que nos ayuden a entender si los hombres realmente somos aliados en esta lucha y cómo podemos asegurarnos de que lo seamos. Una primera pregunta que yo me hago a mí mismo es: ¿qué hago para acabar con la violencia de género? Porque la violencia de género, al menos en mi contexto, no es un problema abstracto. Se manifiesta en datos alarmantes y en historias reales de mujeres que sufren agresiones físicas, psicológicas, económicas y emocionales todos los días. Y no podemos ser indiferentes. Desde mi rol de pastor de una iglesia, pero también como presidente de la Alianza Evangélica Española, trabajo en combatir esta realidad de diversas formas. Algunas de las acciones que llevo a cabo de forma cotidiana y es concienciar, es educar. Realizo charlas, conferencias, talleres para sensibilizar a los hombres y mujeres sobre qué es la violencia de género, cómo detectarla, cómo combatirla. Acompaño y apoyo también a muchas víctimas de violencia de género que sienten que están solas, sin salidas, y mi labor incluye el trabajo con esas víctimas de maltrato, especialmente, sobre todo, en intervención en crisis, en creación de redes de apoyo. No ha sido la primera vez que he aparecido con la policía en casa de alguna persona para defender la vida de una mujer. Y en este sentido, en la creación de redes de apoyo, fomento muchos entornos seguros. La creación de esos entornos seguros, no solo en mi comunidad, pero también en la iglesia que pastoreo. Promuevo espacios donde las mujeres se sientan seguras, donde puedan hablar sin miedo, donde se actúe frente a cualquier signo de violencia. No nos podemos quedar quietos. Pero la lucha no puede depender solo de unas pocas personas. Necesitamos una transformación profunda en nuestra sociedad y para ello es clave el papel de todos los hombres. Una segunda pregunta que me hago es: ¿cómo valoro yo mismo que los hombres sean o no sean aliados de las mujeres en este tema? Volviendo a la Biblia, recuerdo lo que dice Isaías en su capítulo 1, el profeta, allá por el verso 17, dice: aprended a hacer el bien, buscad la justicia, reprended al opresor y sobre todo defended al huérfano y abogad por la viuda. Es definitivo este versículo. Los hombres no solo pueden ser aliados en la lucha contra la violencia de género, deben serlo. No es un asunto de poder, sino de deber, de un deber moral y un deber ético. Ser aliado no significa estar mirando, no, significa reconocer el problema, porque muchos hombres no ven la violencia de género porque como nunca la han sufrido, pero solo porque no sufras algo directamente no significa que no exista. Ser aliado significa hablar cuando otros callan. No basta con no participar en la violencia, no basta con decir yo no maltrato, hay que denunciarla, hay que involucrarse, hay que, como decimos en España, mojarse. Cuando un hombre escucha un comentario machista en presencia de otras personas, una actitud de silencio lo hace cómplice. Siempre una actitud de abuso en otros, si nos callamos, nos hacemos cómplices. Por eso, ser aliado también significa cambiar estructuras. La violencia de género no solo se manifiesta a través de golpes o agresiones directas, está en la desigualdad salarial, en las veces que los problemas de las mujeres se hacen invisibles y que en los estereotipos que seguimos reproduciendo, esos micromachismos que están presentes en nuestra sociedad. Ser aliado es comprometerse a cambiar esto. Ser aliado es reconocer que esta no es una lucha de mujeres contra hombres, es una lucha de toda la sociedad contra la injusticia y la violencia. Y mientras los hombres no tomen un papel activo, la lucha seguirá siendo desigual. Por último, me hago otra pregunta: ¿cómo soy yo en concreto? ¿Soy realmente un aliado de las mujeres en este tema? Porque es importante contestar eso. En primer lugar, siempre que me viene a la mente me enfoco en lo que Jesús, el encuentro de Jesús con aquella mujer adúltera que la querían apedrear. La querían apedrear a ella, no al hombre con el que adulteraba. Jesús no solo protegió a esta mujer de la violencia y el juicio de los hombres, sino que desafió una cultura que buscaba condenarla mientras dejaba impune a los varones involucrados. Por eso ser aliado no es una etiqueta, es una responsabilidad diaria. Escucho y aprendo de las mujeres, me esfuerzo por escuchar a las mujeres y aprender de sus experiencias. Cuestiono incluso, lo que yo hago es cuestionar mis propios sesgos. Analizo mis propias actitudes y pensamientos para no reproducir conductas dañinas. Y honestamente, a veces me asusto en ver en mí mismo situaciones de machismos invisibles, micromachismos que siguen vigentes en mí por causa de la educación. Pero también lo que yo hago es usar mi voz y mi influencia, tanto a nivel nacional e internacional, pero sobre todo en mi comunidad y en la iglesia que pastoreo. No me quedo callado cuando veo actitudes machistas o actitudes de abuso. En este sentido, acompaño y respaldo a las mujeres. Apoyo activamente su crecimiento, en sus derechos, en su seguridad, en todos los sentidos. Pero quisiera cerrar con un verdadero llamado a la acción. ¿Por qué digo un llamado a la acción? Por eso soy pastor, hago un llamamiento a la acción. No quiero cerrar este pequeño mensaje sin hacer ese llamamiento, recordando lo que nos dice el Salmo 103, allá por el versículo 6, que nos dice: el Señor, nuestro Dios, proclama justicia y derecho para todos los oprimidos. Es Dios quien hace esa proclama, para todos los oprimidos, y todos son todos. Las mujeres no están fuera de la proclama que hace nuestro Señor Jesús. Necesitamos hombres que se levanten, que asuman su responsabilidad y que sean aliados reales. Si eres hombre y estás viendo esto, te hago una pregunta. ¿Qué estás haciendo para erradicar la violencia de género? Si de verdad queremos un mundo más justo, debemos trabajar juntos. Porque la igualdad no es un favor que se les hace a las mujeres, es un mandato de justicia y de amor al prójimo. Así que mi invitación es esta: involúcrate, ora, habla, actúa, porque el cambio empieza contigo, conmigo, con cada uno de nosotros. Jesús trató a las mujeres con dignidad, las defendió y desafió la cultura de su tiempo para darles un lugar de honor. Si seguimos sus pasos, debemos hacer lo mismo. Gracias por escuchar.
Some wonderful men from all around the world who are challenging and changing misogynistic cultures and encouraging and bringing gender equality in their spheres of influence. And we're so grateful for all of them. But now I'm going to hand over to Valérie Duval-Pujol. She is a French theologian working within the Baptist denomination who is going to speak to us a little about what it has felt like in France over the last year with some of the cases that have been hitting the news. And Valérie, I shall just pass over to you and let you continue to speak.
Bonjour. As a French person, I've been asked to share about what we have learned from the terrible trial of Mazan with the victim Gisèle Pellicot, who has become an icon of fight against domestic violence. The whole world has followed this trial. Quick reminder of the facts if you have been on a lost island in the last month. A husband rapes for 10 years his wife using chemical submission. He also invites other men through a website to come to his house to rape his wife in their bedroom, totally asleep because of the drugs he gave her. He films everything. It has lasted 10 years, 50 men rapists. So what can we learn from this trial? And I will only mention what we can all learn, not the lesson that we as French have learned, especially on the judicial side. So first teaching, the trial has broken the taboo What taboo? The first teaching is marital rape and chemical submission. The reality of marital rape is still taboo, not spoken of. Domestic violence takes many forms, from physical to economical and even spiritual shape, but also sexual abuse with marital rape. Thanks to movies, we all fear the attack from an aggressor in a dark parking at night, and unfortunately it does happen. But the reality is that most sexual aggressions occur from someone the victim knows very well: a husband, a cousin, a father, or brother, uncle, or neighbor. Some figures that you can look at here. 74% of rapes are committed by someone known to the victim, who may also be a family member, and 67% take place in the victim's or attacker's home. Worldwide, 1 woman in 4 has experienced sexual violence by her partner. It is not just a percentage, it implies real women, and we could name some that we know. For instance, in France, it means 220,000 women a year suffering physical and sexual violence from their partner. That is a lot of women. In France, for 1 in 6 women, the first sexual encounter was not consensual or desired. 1 in 6. Marital rape is still yet not a crime in most countries. A woman has been sexually violated by her husband. She goes to the police to lodge a complaint. And in many countries, she is told, "But ma'am, this is your husband." It is very recent that in some countries, marital rape has been considered as a crime and even an aggravating factor. The European champions have been the Belgium, whose law has been enforced since 1999. 43 countries still do not have legislation on the topic, like Russia, for instance. Marital rape is taboo, and it means that the victims of this kind of violence are often invisible. We don't talk about it. They think they are alone. And it also means most of the times impunity because of the difficulty of proving the rape. The trial of Mazan and Gisèle Pellicot has allowed to talk about this violence. Most of the times, the victims of rape are without proofs. This time, a husband has raped his wife through chemical submission for 10 years and invited 50 other men to rape her, and he filmed all of that. So we have the proofs. And even with the proofs, the rapist did contest. So it helps us to understand how difficult it is for victims when they do not have the proofs. I have mentioned the taboo of marital rape, but this trial has also helped talk about chemical submission, which is still not very much talked about. Sometimes victims do not remember at all, but the body is suffering this aftermath. Other times they remember, but were like paralyzed during the sexual assault. 70% of women who experience chemical submission will also experience sexual attack. Figures, stats are difficult to obtain. In France, 1,229 cases of substance-facilitated assault, this is the acronym SFA, have been recorded in 22, representing an increase of 69% compared with 21. But these stats are greatly underestimated due to victims' unfamiliarity with these chemical procedures and the fact that few cases are referred to the courts. More globally, it has been said that this trial was the trial of the culture of rape. Interesting expression, culture of rape. It means there are elements in our culture that facilitate rape. An example, the belief, false belief, told by the rapist. They said they were victims of their hormones, of a pulsion, and could not resist the temptation. Or another example, striking was the defense of some aggressors in the trial. Didn't you see, the lawyer asked, didn't you see that she was asleep? Didn't you think something was not normal? And some replied, but her husband had allowed me to come and rape her. So I didn't think I needed her consent. This trial is also the trial of that culture of patriarchy, where men think that women are furniture belonging to them, and that they are allowed to do anything they wish to their wife. And us, as Christians, Can we analyze what in the teachings given in churches could also be seen as facilitating culture of rape? I mentioned one, but there are many more. Teachings on the absolute submission of wives to their husband from Ephesians 5, combined with teaching that one's body belongs to the spouse, 1 Corinthians 7. These Bible verses do not mean in any case that a man can do without the consent of his wife. Consent is not just on the day of wedding, it's every day of marital life. The trial of Pellicoat has underlined the importance of the consent. And this is a question for us Christians. How do we teach consent to our young people? In Catholic circles, consent is very much stressed in preparation of marriage for the day of the wedding, because it's a sacrament to be sure there is consent between the spouses. But then it is never mentioned anymore. And what about in your church? How do you teach consent? At which age? At what age? You may have heard that of the European Court of Human Rights decision on 23rd January 25, taking the side of a French woman, refusing the notion of marital duty, stressing the importance of free consent in marital sexuality. The European Court said, no, there is no such thing as marital duty, but there is consent. Is it also what we teach in our churches in preparation of wedding? Second teaching about the aggressors, so not the husband. I talk here about the rapists, the 51 men. They seem to be normal people. The trial has shown that sexual violence could be from every man, any man. They were aged from 24 to 74, from all professional background, even fireman, prison guard, male nurse. Some were themselves victims of domestic violence as child. And here we need to remember that if some perpetrators of domestic violence or sexual violence have been victims themselves, most children, victims of DV, do not become violent. Violence is a choice, and it is possible to get help, not to reproduce this violence. One remark as Christian feminist here, the trial has showed, and Becca has said it as well, the trial has showed it can be any man, yes, but not all men are rapists. In this webinar, we talk about men as allies in the fight against domestic violence, and it is very important to make that distinction. Yes, it can be all men, but not all men are perpetrators. Christian feminism is never a fight against men, hatred feeling towards men, no, but we see them as allies in the fight against gender-based violence. Only 10% of victims of rape make a complaint, and out of these stats, in 99% cases, the rapists are not found guilty by the justice. 99%, it's impunity. So we need men to change these stats by the improvement of investigation, justice, support of the family. Third teaching, the courage of the victim. Everybody has been impressed by the courage of the victim, Gisèle Pellicoat. Her decision to open the trial and not to keep it in closed session will help the shame to change side. Shame on the aggressors and not on the victim anymore. She is 72. She has the age of her mothers, and she was standing there with her head held high. She has said that the support of other women, sorority, has tremendously helped her. Let us remember that when we meet a victim, our support can make a difference. Her final speech after the decision of the judges was an encouragement for all victims to speak up. She said, "Finally, I'm thinking of the unrecognized victims whose stories often remain in the shadows. I want you to know that we share the same struggle." Time will tell if she is heard, even in churches where this violence also happens. Fourth and last teaching, the determination of the police. How did this historical trial all started? Mr. Pellicoat, so the husband rapist, was arrested because of upskirting. He was taking pictures of women in a supermarket under their dresses, without their knowledge. The watchman of the supermarket saw it and called the police. The policeman that arrived decided to go at Mr. Pellico's home and looked in his computer, and there he found hundreds of videos of his wife being raped. If the watchman, if the policeman had not been so professional, we would never have known, and the rapes would probably have continued. In another terrible trial that has started in France in February, a doctor, a surgeon, Monsieur Lescoarnec, is accused of raping 299 young children during 30 years, most of them asleep in his practice or in the wake-up room, 299 young children. The trial will also try to understand how is it possible that such crimes happen in a hospital? And this time, some policemen did not do what was professional. A decade ago, the FBI gave the French police the list of men who were paying with their credit card to go on website with pedocriminal pictures. The surgeon was one of them, but only his computer was searched and not his home. Well, if they had been to his home, they would have found the diaries where he was writing every sexual attack. Probably because he was a well-known surgeon, so they didn't go to his home. Well, if you are shocked with this, let us think. How do we react when a pastor pray? Not pray, but pray with an E, when he is a perpetrator. When a pastor or church leader is accused of sexual violence or domestic violence, and I know several cases, we do not believe the victim. This Pellico trial encourages everybody not to be blinded by the reputation of someone. A word of conclusion. The very same week of the verdict in the Pellico's trial, Notre Dame, the cathedral in Paris, that had been destroyed by flame, was reopened. I've seen the splendor of the restored cathedral, the light through the windows that had become invisible in the last centuries. To me, it is a parable and encouragement for all victims like Gisèle Pellico. Restoration is possible. It requires time, perseverance, expertise, teamwork with men as allies. But it is possible to help the victims, to feel again as a femme debout, a standing woman, restored like Notre Dame. In that restoration process, churches are invited to play a huge role, and this is what we try to do at CNEDA, the Christian Network to End Domestic Abuse, and we did men as allies. Thank you.
Wow, we thank you, Valerie, for sharing. We thank you for your courage. We thank you for the voice that you are in France and around the world. Certainly sobering information. And we want to have this time, we have so many incredible comments coming in the chat and great feedback. And I know you want to hear from these incredible men that are here as part of our panel today. And so before I get started with questions, I wanted to introduce Peter Grant as well. And so Peter, can you share a little bit of your experience and your passion for this area of advocacy?
Thank you, Mariette. I've spent most of my life working in international development, first for the UK government, and then for Tear Fund, and most recently as a consultant. Probably like a lot of men, I spent much of my life unaware and in some ways unconcerned about the issue of violence against women. But that all changed for me on the 1st of August 2008. I was at the World AIDS Conference in Mexico City, and I heard a young woman telling her life story of being raped 3 times as a teenager. And it became apparent that none of the men involved had been held responsible for those actions. She'd not told anyone. And there was just a sense of God filling the room, saying that the world shouldn't be that way. When we came away from that conference, colleagues and I had 2 what we felt were God-given questions, which were, where is the church and where are the men when it comes to ending violence against women? And after a lot of prayer, this led on in 2010 to me being one of the co-founders of Restored with Mandy Marshall, who's now the Gender Justice Director for the Anglican Communion. Our vision was to have women and men standing together to end violence against women. And we wanted to recruit men as allies. And so in 2011, we started the First Man Standing campaign. And I remember launching it at the annual conference of Christian Vision for Men. And we had over 600 men stand up and commit themselves to the cause. And what we asked them to do was three things: to be first men standing. We asked them to respect all the women in their lives. We asked them to be willing to challenge other men about their attitudes and behaviour. And we asked them to sign up to the White Ribbon Pledge, never to commit, condone, or remain silent about violence against women. Now, First Man Standing expanded rapidly, but it proved quite difficult to sustain and hasn't been active for the last few years. So for me, it's a great privilege to be part of this group and to see a new generation of men who want to take this work forward. Thank you.
Thank you so much for sharing, Peter, and for that vision that you were compelled and you took action. And we're grateful for that and the legacy that we see through the work of Restored today. So Matt, I'd like to ask you this question. We were so moved by your poem, by your spoken word presentation. And so why is this an area that you are so passionate about?
Yeah, first of all, can I just comment on something that I've heard a couple of times, that we've been referred to as incredible men, and whereas that is really, really generous and thoughtful, I want to make the point that I'm not. I'm a very ordinary man. And I think that's important to note, because other men can then look at people doing something and think, oh, they're the incredible people, they're the specialists doing it, I don't have to do it. Well, actually, I'm not a specialist, I'm not an incredible person, I'm just seeing things that I've got a heart for. And I think if other men realise that you don't have to be incredible to do this thing, you just need to speak up, I think we empower more men. You know, why is this important to me, this issue? Well, I guess you get proximity with the issue, don't you? And, you know, the stats say, for example, that 1 in 4 women in the UK will be sexually assaulted. Well, I know more than 4 women, so I know that some of these women that I know will be victims or survivors of this. Lately, over the last few years, I've realised and I've come to recognise that members of my own family, some of the women that I know, have had their own experience of this. I didn't know that until most recently, but I still had a kind of heart for this issue. So my first introduction was, I'm an actor by trade, and when I was in my 20s, one of my first jobs, I actually got hired by the probation service in the UK to work with male perpetrators on of a domestic violence program. And what the probation would do is they would give me kind of like these men's offences, and I would have to kind of create a little short piece of theatre that kind of enabled a whole group of men to talk about it. And I remember the light bulb moment for me, because before the groups happened, we used to be with each other in the canteen, having a brew, talking about stuff, and they just felt like me or you. They didn't feel like monsters or anything, or how it's reported in the papers. And I could talk to them about football, I could talk to them about the TV programmes that I was watching. They had respectable jobs, you know, seemed like good guys. And then as soon as the programme started and we were there to talk about some of the behaviours, I soon realised that these are people that were fuelled by entitlement, sexist beliefs and behaviours. And I remember I put this one piece of theatre together once, and it was, I had to come into the room as this man and talk to his wife. And I thought that was what the piece of theatre was about. As I came into the room, one of the men stopped me and said, sorry, can I just stop you right there? You need to go back. And I said, why? And he said, you've come into the room and you've not checked the phone. Now, this was kind of about 25 years ago, before like mobile phones. And there was something in the UK called, I think it was 1471, where you pressed that in and it told you who was your last caller. And I said, well, why do I have to do that? I didn't think it was an important detail. And he said, because the first thing that I do when I come in the house is I press 1471 and I see who she's been talking to. And then I heard a load of men in the room kind of grunt in agreement. So I asked the question and said, does anybody else enter their home and press 1471 and see who the last call was to their wife? And everyone put their hand in the air. And for me, it was a bit of a light bulb moment. This is what control looks like. It looks like in every single detail of somebody's life. So that kind of like, I guess, set me on a pathway, and I started to kind of read about, the power and control wheel and all that kind of stuff to help me in my job working with probation. I left that job a good 20 odd years ago, and then just went on to kind of other jobs and stuff. But it's only more recently when I've kind of become more engaged with the charity Press Fed, who we generate awareness about the issue of men's violence against women, that I've started to kind of look at this whole issue again. Can I also just say as well, I think some of the words that we use are really important, and I've noticed so many times when you read about it in the newspaper, when you read about it in gender justice conferences, we say violence against women. Who's committing the violence? It's men. So I wonder how many times we should use this word, men's violence against women. Sorry, I've forgotten the original question. I've just gone on my soapbox.
No, that's wonderful. Your passion came through. That was the question, and you've answered it. You've demonstrated your passion for this and the ways that you are responding to that. And we thank you for your insight and your advocacy. And so I wanted to ask Ollie, as a pastor and as an advocate, we've had a question in the chat related to how can we encourage other men to participate, whether that's in the context of the church, in the community. How do we rally other men to come alongside and to be part of standing against violence against women?
Okay, how can we get other men on board? It's an uphill challenge. I'll definitely say that, because generally men have so much more power and they don't want to give it up. It works for them. That's why people abuse, because it works for them. So to know that there are people out there like allies, people who are doing the work and getting the voice out. I think it's got to be preached from every single pulpit. I think that every single church, God hates injustice. He absolutely hates injustice. And if it breaks our hearts when we hear this stuff, what's it doing to God's heart when he sees, the partners, the women who are experiencing that? And I think to be a voice first off, female leadership, I think is so key, because essentially when a church, and this is going to upset a bunch of people probably, but to see leadership where it's just men, the women, because you're a woman, you are therefore disqualified from holding a position of authority, because context, things are taken out of context, and it said, well, you don't permit a woman to have authority over a man. That was an individual case. You've got to understand the context. Paul was actually an advocate for women. He was training up women. He was training up men and women, and he worked alongside women to empower them and to empower the church. And the idea was that when everybody needs to learn. But this was a culture where women were always set apart. The synagogue, they had to sit apart, so they were actually being brought in to a place. That's how cultural Paul was. To have leadership that is just purely men, essentially is saying to all the women in the congregation, and there are more women in our church, there are more women than there are men, and I think that's the world over. There are more women than there are men, and yet for one reason or another, they are disqualified from positions of leadership. And so you are absolutely taken away just this incredible source of sharing the load and the gospel being shared. But what does that say to the women in the congregation? It says you're not good enough because you're a woman. And it also says that, if I do have an issue about domestic abuse, if I do want to go and talk to somebody about it, I'm likely to have to share with a series of men. And who are they going to side with? Because it's a really big message that actually, my voice is not the same because I'm a woman. So first off, I think that we've got to be raising awareness. We've got to be talking about domestic abuse. We've got to be preaching about domestic abuse. We've got to be instructing men. I really love to hear, the what Dominic was saying about those groups getting together and and the response. I mean, it brought tears to my eyes to think that the wife was saying, yeah, after that training, there was a big change. I mean, that was just life affirming. That was awesome. How to get men? Well, it's challenging them on their toxicity, on their male entitlement, and I think it's living it out alongside them. You've got to be exemplary. You've got to be living alongside them, and like it was said, challenge when you hear sexist jokes, because everything about the culture is so misogynistic. So we've got to make a stand. It needs to be confronted, needs to be challenged. I think the number one way we're going to tackle domestic abuse is through child care and child social services. My opinion, it's a personal one, is that perpetrators will not engage with domestic abuse services unless there is actually a reason, there's a motive behind it. And contact with their children, access to their children, is probably the number one way. Short-term prison sentences, working with probation, the protective orders don't seem to be stopping domestic abuse. And it's the same in the church now. The church, and I found that Christian men are some of the hardest to work with because they want to take it all in-house with the pastor to deal with it. And the pastors don't have the foggiest idea what they're talking about. They don't know about power and control. I think pastors, need to connect with these types of organizations such as Restored, and they need to be getting in their hands the information about theology and about, actually, understanding about domestic abuse and refer. So how to get men? We're discussing it. We're having lots of ongoing conversations. We still don't know how to get men involved more and more, but at least we're discussing it. The ball has started rolling.
Thank you. I think we have to just keep taking one step forward and one foot after the other to move this and see progress. But Reverend Dominic, I have seen lots of comments and feedback, and we had some questions in the chat related to just this component of the intergenerational need to address this, that it's beautiful to see this being addressed in the context of marriages and trying to bring those to a place of health. But is there work that can be done and should be done with boys, with girls, having those conversations at an early age to help teach them a true version of God's intent for these relationships?
Thank you, Merit, for this opportunity and also for the team. I'm so happy and excited to be part of this team because I get inspired hearing from my fellow men what their amazing work they are doing in their context. And please, thank you so much. The passion that keeps me doing the work I do is when I remember the history where I came from and also the tears from my mom's eyes every evening and how the fight was overwhelming for my mom. These are the things that actually, when I say, I think of my own daughters because I'm married and have children. I don't want my children to experience the same. I also don't want my sisters and any woman around the world to experience what I saw in my family. So thank you so much for working on this. Currently, I work with men, and we have 42 active men's group in Kenya that actually are working to end domestic abuse and gender-based violence. They have what they call breakfast meeting every month that actually they discuss issues of gender equality, gender-based violence, and the root causes of sexual and gender-based violence. Such topics are very important because there are some groups that we are seeing they are adopting different social gender norms. They are changing their attitudes and mindset. And we find that a father is actually a husband and a wife are going to hospitals together. That's something that is really positive for us. Because many times when we are taking a child in our culture to the hospital, it's a woman's issue. We are seeing women, men also actually getting to learn how to cook, although it might be late, but actually they are accepting that they can go to the kitchen and go and cook and also work together in their social responsibility as a family. We are also seeing pastors adopting interpretation of scriptures that affirm equality and dignity for both men and women, something that actually we count as a success for the great work and we are doing in Kenya and across East Africa. We are also seeing schoolboys, because we are working with at least 15 public schools in Kenya, which actually are now, when we are working with those schools, we are teaching them, we are giving them mentorship and actually telling them that actually gender roles are not God-given the way that we are seeing the community, but gender roles are socially constructed, and actually men and women, boys and girls can actually work together, not burdening their sisters, women, with gender roles that actually women are supposed to do this and men are supposed to do this. So we are working with the boys in schools, which actually is something I would encourage for boys to learn these norms as early as possible, so that they can grow understanding their true identity as boys and girls, and how actually why God created them to be, and also that they can work together to respect each other. So one thing that has worked for us is actually working with the boys and girls in the community, and also working with the faith leaders as community gender champions, working with men in their groups, so that they can talk about issues of sexual and gender-based violence. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And the content is so rich, and the comments and the questions that we're receiving in the chat are so rich as well. And so I wish we had another hour to continue this conversation, but we are approaching the end of our time. So I wanted to pose just one final question before we wrap up. We have a very good final message to share with you in just a few moments. But before we do, with our incredible panel. I'm going to say incredible again, Matt. I received your comments earlier, but I'm still going to say incredible and affirm you today, especially for investing your time. But as we close, I wonder if I could call upon each of you just to share what would be one suggestion you would have for those listening today, watching today, those that will watch the replay. What is one thing that they could do to take action in a tangible, practical way in their churches, their communities, and customized for their context? So Peter, I would pose that question to you first. What would be one suggestion you would have of that one step forward they could take today?
Well, I think for the men watching, it would be a willingness to speak out to their friends and to be challenging the kind of sexist jokes and behaviour and so on. Because I think if we can put some grit in the system and people don't say, well, this is normal and acceptable, then we begin to change the atmosphere where we are.
Thank you. We've heard similar stories as well of just there's a different recognition that comes when men speak up against this. And so we affirm that truly. Matt, what would you say?
Yeah, so we do. We've done a play of the Book of Ruth, and we kind of I perform it verbatim, and on the basis of it, we do a lens on the character of Boaz, because I think you can look at him as a role model, an early role model for gender justice. Here is someone that saw two women vulnerable in their culture, and he kind of took ownership for that. So we've done this kind of like this acronym, BeLikeBoaz, and the B is for behaviour, so you can kind of look at your own behaviour and you can challenge the behaviour of other men. The O is for objectification, so just think about how, what you're gazing upon. We know that with smartphones and technology nowadays, it's the Wild West out there. So be aware of that. The A is for awareness, so you can kind of read books on it, watch TED Talks on the issue, visit Women's Aid website, all these kind of things, get a bit clued up, listen to women in your life and learn from their experiences. And then the Z is the zero tolerance, so let's work towards an attitude, especially in churches, of having zero tolerance towards men's violence against women.
Wonderful. And we'll be sharing those resources so that you can learn more about how you can be like Boaz as we wrap up for today. Ollie, what would you say as a suggestion, one step forward that could be taken today?
I think be connected. There are so many now resources out there, and there are Christian resources out there. The church really needs to shine a light in the darkness here and be a voice. But I think the more that we go learning and discovering, the more we realize we don't know anything. You know, I stumbled into this whole field of domestic abuse. I didn't have any idea about it, and I see so many missed opportunities, so many with the youth, with partners, with cases that were around us, and we never said anything. I think learning alongside people who know a heck of a lot more about this and being informed, and then they will give you the information. I don't think like what we've had today touches the surface, you know, of the questions, or there are so many more answers and there's so much more information out there. But there are places to go, and there are people who have some brilliant resources. So I would say Get Connected and Restored is definitely for churches one of the best resources that I've come across, and I really would promote that.
Thank you, Pastor. And Reverend Dominic, what would you say as a step that could be taken today?
Yes, this is to church leaders and faith actors wherever they are. The Bible from Genesis to Revelation talks about equality for both men and women. When properly interpreted, the Bible is number one tool for everybody who wants to know equal worth and dignity for both men and women. The Bible has been misused to support patriarchy and cause gender-based violence. We therefore say that the church stand a better position to dismantle patriarchal beliefs because we have the tool, the gospel of Christ. Thank you.
Thank you, Reverend Dominic. And thank you again to all of our panelists. Thank you, Valerie, for sharing your heart and for all of your incredible leadership in this area. One of our colleagues, Jenny Inchkin, is also on, but because of time, we'll get with her to have her segment added and sent out to you so you can receive that as well. But I just want to thank everyone again for their time and being part of this panel. And I'm going to pass it back over to Becca to close us for today.
We have gone over time a little, but I do want to close us out with a message from actually one of the trustees of Restored, a man called Nathan Maguire, who is part of the Baptist Alliance and who is a pastor himself, but who has also worked with perpetrators. He's got a really wonderful faith message for us at the end of our session. And at the end of that, I shall pray and close, but understand some of you might need to leave sooner. So let me do that, and I will share my screen and share that message with you now.
Hello, my name is Nathan Maguire and I'm a Baptist minister from London and a trustee on the board of Restored. Though I would have loved to have been with you in person or live, I am grateful for the chance to share with you today. We've entered into Lent, and Lent invites us to reflect deeply on the suffering, death and resurrection of Jesus Christ. In John chapter 19, verses 25 to 27, we see solidarity embodied at the foot of the cross, where Mary, along with the disciple he loved, stand together with Jesus. Their presence models resistance, redefines relationships, and calls for collective responsibility. Yet this message comes at a time when global resistance to gender justice is growing. For example, where this meeting is being held in person in the US, corporate and political leaders are abandoning diversity, equity, and inclusion initiatives, dismissing them as unnecessary or divisive. Across the world, many of us will be aware that backlash against gender justice movements is on the rise. But what we see in the cross is Jesus confronting evil and not retreating. He is committed. He pays the price, reminding us that solidarity, in fact, has a cost. Long before the cross, Jesus models a life that embodies solidarity. Philippians 2 verse 6 tells us this: he did not consider equality with God something to be used for his own advantage. Jesus fully enters into human suffering, not from a safe distance, but at a great cost in coming close to us. True solidarity is costly, and for men benefiting from privilege, acknowledging gender-based violence isn't enough. We must move beyond our words of distance to action, calling out misogyny, challenging harmful systems, and embracing the discomfort of unlearning. Too often, allyship becomes performative, expressed when convenient. But Jesus shows us that true solidarity means giving up power, making ourselves vulnerable, and standing with those who suffer. At the cross, Mary, Mary, and Mary, Jesus' mother, Mary, the wife of Clopas, and Mary Magdalene, remain when the other male disciples flee. It is easy to stand with Jesus when he is performing miracles, when the crowds adore him, or even when he is being gloriously transfigured. It's interesting that the 3 male disciples who were present at Jesus' transfiguration weren't necessarily present with him at the foot of the cross. Today, women worldwide stand against oppression at great personal risk. True solidarity demands more than our words. It means taking risks, speaking up when unpopular, listening when we'd rather defend ourselves, and showing up when it would be easier to look away. Friends, there are times in my own ministry when I grow weary, and the constant engagement with abuse, whether it's in my own Christian community or wider and further afield, can feel draining. But as I've been reflecting on this passage and reminding myself of Jesus' last word, he says this: I first. Even in suffering, Jesus expresses vulnerability. Those who embody solidarity will first. We will first when we challenge misogyny in the locker room and feel at odds with those around us. We will first when we find ourselves needing to confront our friends who we found out is an abuser. We will first when Christian communities protect powerful, abusive men rather than victims and survivors. Friends, when we grow weary, when all the resources we've created and used, engaged in political action, we must always remember to return to the source of living water. Justice work is long and costly, but our strength comes from the Spirit who calls us to keep going. The cross is a site of imperial violence, but also a moment of solidarity. Mary, Mary, and Mary, and the beloved disciple model a solidarity that is risky, relational, and communal. And it is in that moment of their witness we are charged to remember that our crucified Saviour, the one who emptied himself by taking the form of a servant, being found in appearance as a man, he humbled himself by becoming obedient unto the point of death, even death on a cross. He is present among us.
Father, we thank you that you are still present amongst us, that you gave up all the privileges of heaven to come and stand in solidarity with us. We thank you that your intention was never for one person to rule over another, but to work together in unity, in partnership, in equality. And we thank you for those men and women who work towards that even now. We pray that you would be with us as we go from this session into the spheres and influences of our life, that you would help us to regain and re-engage with that original intention of yours in creation, to make man and woman in your image, that they should work together to work out the beauties of your kingdom and your will, and that you would bless those who try to seek equality and help them to make a world that looks an awful lot more like you originally intended. Amen.